Hey, Sam.
Yeah?
Stand by those posts over there.
Okay.
Ready?
So welcome back everybody to the channel. We are deep into The Last of Us right now on HBO. This is episode 5 and it's named Endure and Survive, taken straight from the collectible comic books you find in the game Savage Starlight. There's a lot to go over in this one. It's packed full of Easter eggs. It's really well done to the source material. It's quite a violent episode. There's this huge scene with the infected, very little CGI, awesome makeup, awesome prosthetics, really well executed from the production team. Let's get into it. So just to recap, Ellie and Joel have arrived in Kansas City. They've been run off the road. They took refuge in a tall building to scope out where they were going the next day. It ended where they meet up with Henry and Sam, two great characters from the game. So far this series, as I expected, it's been absolutely awesome. It's been the perfect adaptation to the source material. The actors have been pulling off these roles absolutely beautifully. I'm not a fan of the Kathleen character that we saw in the last episode, I'm going to be honest about that. Let's see if I can change my mind maybe a little bit in this one. We need a little bit of backstory on this character. So let's get into the episode. A very brutal opening to episode 5, showing the people have overrun Fedra after all these years. There's a line in the episode from Henry where he says, when people do all these bad things to you, when the people get the chance, they're going to do it right back to you. And this opening scene of the episode 5, it shows you that in quite a violent fashion. And then we go straight to Henry and Sam, who are trying to get away from all the carnage. Henry's played by this actor called Lamar Johnson, great actor. Kievan Woodard, little boy, he's only 8 years old, is a deaf actor. He's playing a younger version of what we know as Sam from the game. Now, in the game, Sam wasn't deaf, and he was more kind of just a little bit younger than Ellie. But when they talk about this on the podcast, it was Craig Mazin himself had this idea of saying they wanted a younger version of Sam. Neil Druckmann said he was so jealous because he wished he'd have thought of that when they originally made the game. I think it's a great little touch. I think it pulls a lot more on those emotional heartstrings with these scenes. He plays the role really well. They're really, really good characters in this episode. I like what they've done with it. We move straight on to Perry and Kathleen is, she's got the prisoners, the collaborators as they're called. Nobody likes the collaborators in this story. They're just known as rats. There's a scene later where Joel says to Henry, I don't want to work with a rat.
I'm a collaborator.
I don't work with rats.
Yeah, you fucking do.
I like what they've done with the Henry and Sam thing in this, how they've backtracked to before Joel and Ellie arrived in the city. There were Adelstein, the doctor who you see Kathleen shoot in episode 4, and it's kind of building its way up to that moment. And there's this little back and forth when they first get to the attic where they're hiding out for a few days with Henry and Sam, and he's talking. You'll see that Sam's communicating to Henry with ASL sign language, which is American Sign Language, and they brought on the ASL people on the production of this, and the actors, especially Lamar Johnson himself, that they learned ASL. Apparently this guy Lamar Johnson learned ASL what he needed to for the show, like over the weekend. He's an intelligent kid and he got right on board with it straight away, as did Bella Ramsey and that, and that's really cool that they've added this into these scenes, I think. And you'll see that during this episode, Sam himself's writing on what you call a magic slate. I don't know, does anybody remember magic slates? I think I do. It reminded me of the Etch-a-Sketch we had over here, if you remember that. But the magic slate, like you tore the paper off and you writ on it, and he's got this like Woody Woodpecker version. If you look closely, you can see the Woody Woodpecker logo on the slate he has, but it's all faded. But yeah, cool little touch and a great little way how they did those scenes with the communication with Sam. There's a nice little scene where he puts the face paint onto Sam, like they refer to him as Super Sam. He likes to draw all the pictures of the superheroes, but you can see in the pictures that it just shows you, like, even with these characters, they've got a bit of a deep hatred for Fedra. As all the pictures that Sam's drawing, if you look closely, it's like those guys as superheroes against Fedra. So as he was born and brought into this world, that's all he's known, really. He's like the people against the establishment kind of thing. A few people, I noticed on Twitter, somebody pointed out that the scene where they see Joel and Ellie for the first time, you can see the laundromat logo in the reflection. It kind of goes over his eyes. I'll put a still on the screen, and it's like, I think I don't know if they did it on purpose, the production team, but it looks like it plays a little bit of a homage to what he did with Sam with the face paint, and clever little Easter egg that if that's what were intended. I'm not sure if they intended to do that, the production team, or not, but a few people pointed that out, which I thought were quite interesting. Of course, it just builds up to that moment where they meet Joel and Ellie, and of course Joel's just got that like monotone arsehole voice, as Ellie says, which is quite funny, and Henry doesn't know how to look into that, basically.
That's right.
It's a weird fucking tone, man.
That's just the way he sounds. He has an asshole voice. Joe, tell him he's okay.
Everything is great.
Dude.
Story of Henry and Sam being part of Kansas and part of these people, that's not a thing in the game. Henry and Sam are literally trying to make their way through Pittsburgh, as Joel and Ellie are, and they've got split up from the group and they're just trying to make it to the other side. And the more survivors of self, Henry's a bit more of a violent survivor like Joel is himself. He's a lot younger, but that's not really a reflection of what he's like in the game. They've made him more of a softly spoken guy. He's not really been subject to any violence. He's not really committed any violence on anyone until he talks about the thing with Kathleen's brother. But in the game, he's a much more hardened survivor, because you have to play alongside him to kill enemies to get through these sections of Pittsburgh. They kind of took that out because, again, with the TV show, you don't need to have all these scenes where he's just killing enemy. You don't need to put all that in. So they changed them bits up, and I think it worked much better for the show, to be fair. You know, that we've got the younger Sam, we've got the less violent Henry, and I think it works really well in this context. In the game, people love the back and forth between Ellie and Sam. Some really nice scenes between those two. It's beautifully acted. Again, Bella Ramsey's brilliant. The young Kieran Woodard's great, and some of these scenes are quite emotional scenes, as you'd expect with this kind of thing. So they plan their escape in this just like they do in the game. In the game, you just have to fight your way through like a skeleton crew on the border of the city. Again, it brings you into more fight scenes where you're taking them out with Henry. They've changed it up in the TV show, and they're implementing the sewer scenes from the game, and that's how they're going to escape. They head to the tunnels, and then it comes to some of the best Easter eggs to the source material you're going to see in this episode, because they did the tunnel sewer section perfectly in this. In the game, you've got the backstory of Ish, and you've got the notes, and it tells the story of how they had a community underground, the family with all the children, and you pick up the notes that talk about that, and you see the pictures on the wall, and they've set up this scene beautifully. They've got all the kids' toys laid out, and they take a bit of downtime. You have to fight some infected in this section of the game, but Sam and Ellie, they start playing football. If you come to that part of the game and you stand there at the right time, you see that exact moment as well.
Hey, Sam.
Yeah?
Stand by those posts over there.
Okay.
Ready?
Okay, do it. Oh.
The best Easter egg is the picture that I put up on screen now, the picture of Ish and Danny, the protectors from the children's drawing, and they've just placed it there, and it's a really good nod to this whole backstory that you don't get to see in the game. They've shown it in the same kind of light as you see in this show, and it's a really, really cool moment for the fans. And the Easter eggs don't stop there. You've got Ellie and Sam sat down, and he pulls out the Savage Starlight comic book. You know, we've just had all those Easter eggs, and then this one comes out. For those of you that haven't played the game, the Savage Starlight is a comic that Ellie's really into, and it's actually a collectible item in the game. So there's like so many of these comics throughout the Last of Us world. When you first get introduced to the comic in the car scene from the last episode, that unlocks like where you can collect all these comics throughout, and you pick them up as Joel. If you collect them all, again, you get another PlayStation trophy. And they've copied the comic in this exactly the same like the game, and that's where the title of the episode comes from: Endure and Survive.
To the edge of the universe and back. Endure and survive.
Excuse me?
Savage Starlight. That comic I've been reading, it's what the hero says after a big battle.
Endure and survive.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's a really nice little moment where Ellie's reading the comic book with Sam, and she's doing the endure and survive thing with the ASL sign language, and she's learning from him. And I thought that was really, really nice little moment in the episode.
Endure, survive. Endure, survive. Fuck yeah, man.
Henry says to Joel just a little bit later in this scene, you know, you might not be her father, but you're someone's. He can see it in him, he can see, you know, his old vibe and how he's protecting her. And again, in true Joel fashion, he just dismisses that comment and moves along, just like he would in the game.
You might not be her father, but you were someone's. See, I could tell.
We waited long enough.
As I said in my last video to this, in episode 4, I wasn't a fan of the character of Kathleen. Now, I was hoping when that finished they were at least going to put some backstory into this episode, because I know for you guys that's watched this, you just know she's not going to last very long. And there's this scene in the bedroom where she lived with her brother, tells that little bit of a backstory about how he was a great man and Michael, her brother. And it just goes back to that whole thing in The Last of Us world where people's rage and the violent tone, it always comes from love and wanting to protect those closest to you. We see it with Joel, we're seeing it here with Kathleen, you know, we see it with Henry, we see it with Abby in Last of Us Part 2, we see it with all these characters. It always stems from love. She talks about how she is, and then Perry just justifies it perfectly for her by saying, you know, he was a great man but he didn't change anything, you did. And he's like justifying Kathleen's actions and just filling her more with confidence that all the people are on her side. I quite liked this scene. I'm still not a huge fan of this character. No disrespect to Melanie Linsky, but you know, so far 5 episodes in, if I had one negative, it's only a small one. I'm just not a big fan of this character that's an addition to the TV show. I mean, that it's just me being picky. I'm just being a massive fanboy, you know what I mean? But yeah, that's the only negative for me personally so far that I'm going to take away from this series. And we come to one of the great scenes of the game, the sniper scene. I wasn't sure if they were going to put this in the show, but they've put it in just like the game. Now, in the game, this section, it actually takes place in daylight, but in the TV show they've just done it under like the shadow of darkness. I listened to the HBO podcast, and this scene wasn't a regular street. They built this street on a parking lot from scratch, and they knocked all this stuff up in like a month with professional set builders, actual professional regular house builders, and they just made an absolutely amazing job of it, as you can see in these scenes. Obviously a production company such as HBO, they pull things like this off, and when I first watched this, I didn't realise this was a set. I thought maybe it was just an old abandoned regular street, a bit like they did with Billstown in episode 3, because that was actually an old town that they used for that, like an old flooded town, which a lot of it were derelict. But no, this was built from scratch. So that it brings you onto the sniper thing, and you know, Joel talks about this trust with Ellie. We're getting that bond a little bit more coming through. So he gets into the house, and instead of it being a younger guy who he has a fight with in this scene, it's actually an old man, and he tells him not to shoot, and he comes across like the guy's old, he's tired, and he just doesn't care anymore, you know. He's lived a long life, and he tries to turn the gun on Joel. He knows he's going to die, and Joel just shoots him dead, basically. Now we come on to this huge scene with the infected. Now they talk briefly about the infected earlier on in the episode, where all the years ago Fedra drove them underground. The tunnels were empty, as Henry promised Joel, how they got through to the sewer section, how they got to the other side, but essentially Fedra drove all the infected underground, and that's where they all stayed, because in this scene it's the typical face-off as you would. Kathleen's trying to give this big speech, and you just know something's brewing. And when the infected break out, it's absolutely chaos, this scene, and it's so well executed. There's very little CGI in this scene. It's mostly made up of makeup and prosthetics and just great movement acting. Brought on movement directors and such from the Planet of the Apes movies to help with all this like crazy fast movement in mass and all that. In the game, the first time you see the bloater, it's actually in Bellstown in the school. Now, as I've touched on before, the bloater is a much older infected. It's basically like much bigger and stronger people who survive the infection process rather than like going against a wall and dying out and just becoming a part of the environment. You know, you get stronger people who can survive and age more as infected, and the bloater's a result of that. And this bloater, it's absolutely fantastic. It's a full I'll put some pictures up on the screen. It's a full prosthetic makeup suit, and it's played by this huge guy called, he's like a 6'6" actor stuntman called Adam Basil. I mean, big shout to that guy. He plays the bloater great. The movement looks like the game, and finally comes to Perry's demise. He's trying to protect Kathleen, and you know, you see it take out a couple of guys. But you know, famously in the game, the bloater, if you go anywhere near it, you die. It's a one-hit kill, and he grabs Joel by the face and he like pulls off his head from his mouth, and that's exactly what happens to Jeffrey Pierce right here in this scene. But yeah, talking about the actors that play the infected in this, Adam Basil played the bloater great, but a big nod to the little girl who played the horrifying child clicker. So Ellie gets into the car and you see the little child clicker pop her head through and climb into the car, and she's bending around and like maneuvering over the seats, and it's played by this little 9-year-old girl called Sky Cowton, who's this she's like a gymnast contortionist. They tried to cast her like a young contortionist for this scene, and they went through loads of people, and they finally come to this girl Sky Cowton, and it's an amazing little scene with her and Ellie in the car, how she tries to get out. It leads me on to what Kathleen said to Henry in this scene. Now Henry was saying about Sam, oh, he's just a kid, and Kathleen just completely bats it off. She's saying, you know, kids die, Henry, and they die all the time. So it's just ironic that they used this clicker as well to finally bring Kathleen to her death. And you know, she talks about kids dying, and she dies by the hand of a child clicker. You know, what more could you want in this scene? Some great action shots where you see Joel protecting Ellie with a sniper rifle, which comes onto Ellie like saving Sam and Henry. And fans of the game, you just know what's happened right here in this scene. So if people who haven't played the game, it comes up to a very emotional part of the story. You know, all the gamers play this, it hits home every time in these scenes. At this point in the episode, when Ellie's talking to Sam, he's using the magic slate to talk to her, and you just know, when I watched the episode, I'm like, oh man, they're making this scene much more emotional than it is in the game. You know, with the younger Sam, the fact that he's deaf, they're using the magic slate to communicate. He really looks up to Ellie, you know, and it's like, oh man. Taken back by the scene where it shows her his leg. Now he doesn't do that in the game. He talks to Ellie in the game. You know, she tries to give him the robot. She talks about how scared she is. It's exactly the same with the dialogue. But she goes back into the other room and he just looks at the bite mark himself, and Ellie doesn't actually realise till she comes in the next morning. But you know, in this TV show, it shows her the bite mark, and then Ellie talks about how her blood's medicine, and I'm like, oh man, that really playing on the heartstrings with that one, because not only does it show that she's trying to save Sam, but it also shows how really naive she is, and she thinks she can just quite simply use his blood as medicine. And I thought that were a really emotional part of this episode. And she wakes up in the morning and Sam talks about, just like he does in the game, is worried about, you know, if you turn into a monster, is it still you inside? So Ellie wakes up and Sam's still deaf, and I think that's that's really horrifying part of this scene. Sam's still deaf, and he doesn't notice her until she walks around to him, and that's when he attacks her. And it's kind of verifying what Sam was scared of, and that kind of confirmed it in this scene, which just makes it even more sad, makes it even more horrific, but beautifully executed. And it's the really sad moment when you see Henry has to shoot Sam, and Joel tries to take the gun off him. It's a really tragic scene in the game. It's a really tragic scene in the TV show. But I've got to say, it is my favourite parallel to the game, this scene. It's very much done the same as the source material. They pull it off really well. And again, you know, it's not the happiest moment of the episode, but it still is my favourite parallel to the game.
What the hell? Shit, he's turning! Screw it! Ellie, are you all right?
Oh my God.
Sam?
Oh no.
Sam?
Easy.
Henry? Henry, stay there. Henry?
What have you done?
I'm gonna get that gun from you, okay?
What did I do?
Okay, easy.
Is it your fault?
This is nobody's fault, Henry.
It's all your fault!
Henry! Henry, no!
And what's nice about this final scene right here, now in the game, Ellie, when they're on the way to Tommy's out in Wyoming, they come across a child's grave with like a teddy bear on the top. And she says to Joel, you know, she regrets not being able to put the little robot onto Sam's grave, and like she's feeling very regretful. They kind of touched on this in the TV show, you know, they buried the bodies. She put the magic slate saying sorry onto Sam's grave, and I think that were like a little nod to what they didn't do in the game, if you would. So that were quite nice. And then, like Joel, Ellie turns around, asks where West is, and she moves on. And she's very much being like Joel, I find, in this scene. I think that bond's really grown. Joel takes a look at it, and they're back on the road. So that brings us to the end of episode 5. They're gonna head west, they're gonna head towards Wyoming and Tommy's. Kansas City has fallen. That's the end of the Kansas storyline, just like it'd be the end of the Pittsburgh scenes in the game. And that brings us to the end of this episode, guys. We saw a lot in this one. They packed a lot into it, some great action scenes, more character development, great roles with Henry and Sam. And when the final credits go up, it's a song called Fuel to Fire by Agnes Abel. It's a really, really cool song, this one.
Do you want me on your mind, or do you want me?
And they've put some great music into the TV show. Now, I love Gustavo's music in the games. It's absolutely perfect for the games. I mean, give that guy all the awards. It's the tone of it, and how it's so unique to those games is absolutely fantastic. But they've been putting some really good popular music into the TV show with some of the 80s tracks that they've used. But my favourite so far is this Agnes Abel act in the credits of this one. But yeah, guys, that brings us to the end of part 5. I really, really, really enjoyed this episode. It's one of my favourites so far. The HBO are just smashing it. I mean, there's never been an adaptation this good. There's just no arguments, there's no question that this is the best adaptation ever brought to TV. They've stuck to the source material so well, just so many Easter eggs that only fans of the game would notice. You know, the actors are absolutely amazing. They are really pulling off these roles. I expected them to. I knew Bella would, I knew Pedro would, but they just exceeded all of my expectations. Again, Bella's pulling it off perfectly well. All the hate stopped, as I've said before. That was obvious. I mean, it's just the little things. If you look at, for example, at the end of this episode when Henry takes his own life, just that split-second reaction from Bella Ramsey as Ellie, that horrifying look when Henry shoots himself. Henry, no! It's just perfectly executed. They're doing a great job of it. You know, Lamar Johnson were brilliant as Henry. Kieran Woodard, the young 8-year-old boy, absolutely fantastic as Sam. Anyway, with that being said, guys, that's the end of episode 5. I'm sure I'll get into episode 6. And I think episode 6 is going to have to be a long episode, because if you look at the trailer, which I think I'm going to break down actually, if you look at the trailer, there's a lot of game covered in that trailer for the fans who know. And I think it's going to need quite a long episode, because they're going quite far into that one with the source material. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they execute that. So I'll leave that one there. Really hope you enjoyed the video. I'm not getting many views on these, you know, it's just like a little extra channel that I've put together. If you want to leave any comments or talk to me about this show, I'm all ears, you know. So anyway guys, that brings this video to a close. That were episode 5. I'm sure I'm going to see you in episode 6. So with that being said, I shall see you in the next one. Take care.